Thanks, all. So in some ways, this is going to be a little bit of a mashup of what Pooja and Henry talked about. But my answer, in brief, to if Web3 is to work, what we need is to really focus on building for composability. That's what we're doing at Ceramic, but I won't talk about that too much today. I'm going to talk about kind of why we're focused on that. Quote from Eric Ries that I think about a lot at my own startup. Startups don't starve, they drown. We always have way more ideas than we have time. And I think in a lot of ways, the Web3 and crypto ecosystem is itself a startup. We haven't really found product market fit yet. We have lots of vision, lots of ideas, but we're doing a whole lot without a ton of focus on what I think probably matters most. And so I think we kind of need some constraints as an ecosystem to get us to focus and really build the things that are going to let us really expand to a mainstream user base. So before we talk about this era of the computing transition, I want to look back to a previous one. When web apps came out, there were a lot of critics who said web apps couldn't compete with native apps because they would never be as fast. Just physical limitations. You could never have the same latency on a web app as a native app. But that kind of missed the point. Early web apps did just look like native apps, but slower. But then they kind of learned to compete on things that native apps just couldn't do, on availability and on collaboration. And that's when web apps took off. And I'd say that Web3 definitely can't compete on the things that traditional apps are best at right now. But there's things that Web3 can do that traditional apps just can't do, and we should be putting all of our time towards that. And so for me, that's composability. And in particular, composable use cases, not so much killer apps. And I think that this is really the core feature of Web3, this composability that you get from decentralization, from permissionlessness, that is going to really unlock the use cases that make Web3 mainstream. And Web2 simply just cannot do this. And so instead of building entire stacks in silos like we've had to do with traditional apps, composability gives application developers the ability to plug into a shared data layer that's never existed before, to build much faster than they've ever been able to. We've seen that on blockchain, to grow much more easily because you import a user base and data, and to just build with an ecosystem in a way that's never been possible before. And so I think that if we're really serious about making Web3 work, we need to make composability work for real. If we're talking about how to actually build something of value, we also have to talk about who it's valuable for. And I think we sometimes miss this and assume that we're building today in Web3 for the same developers and startups that we've been building for the last generation of the web. And I just don't think that's the case. If you look at startup outcomes today, they are super uneven. Venture firms know this. A tiny proportion of startups, and therefore of developers and founders and investors, have a massive proportion of the returns. Like 10% of startups actually succeed in any meaningful way. Of those, 10% have most of the returns. So it's not just not a normal distribution, it's even more extreme than a power distribution. And that just creates much less opportunity for your typical builder or developer or entrepreneur because the outcomes are so narrow. You either fail or you hugely succeed. That's not the case in a lot of other creative industries. You look at restaurants. Plenty of people are chefs who want to create something. They're able to just create a single restaurant and serve a customer base that loves their food. They can do this because they tap into a food supply chain that already exists. That whole supply chain that you need to serve food to customers is composable. That's just not the case for building. It is the case for building products and services online today. It's not the case for actually monetizing them. So we have a very different model for building successful products, businesses online. And so I think that the focus we should have for Web3 is in normalizing this outcome distribution for products and services, targeting all of these developers and builders who just don't have an outlet for what they're trying to build today. So I think that's the opportunity, and those are the folks who are going to most value composability. It's not true that the startup founder looking to make the next Deca unicorn is going to jump at the chance to give up all of their data and their network effects. But the vast majority of developers aren't that person. They're people who maybe have a lot of entrepreneurship, but today's model locks them out of any reasonably good outcome. So how do we actually make this happen? So composability, but composability is pretty hard. It would be nice to say, okay, there's one thing we can do, and it just unlocks all of this. But I actually think that the key is we need a whole stack that works together for composability. Until we have a whole solution that truly delivers composability, none of this works. Any one bottleneck or any one fault, and we don't have composability that's good enough to attract those developers to actually build and invest in this. And so there's a lot of ways to paint the picture of the stack. The way that I've got it here is at base, Pooja just talked about kind of the data layer. So at the very base primitive, data needs to be composable. The raw bits that are powering applications need to be able to be used across different platforms. But there needs to be a good enough developer experience, whether you're talking about databases or other interfaces. If it's too hard to use to actually make use of that composable data layer, you can't get all of those entrepreneurs in the middle to come build on it. On top of that, you need actually a way to come to consensus and discover the data and the data models that are there and have real practical composability, not just theoretical because it's on a permissionless network, but the ability to make use of it. And then you have to give those developers a way to serve those applications to users in a way that is at least frictionless enough for them to stand it. Maybe it's not quite the same as Web 2, but we need really good authentication and UX if we're actually serious about giving developers the tools that they need. And until we actually tackle each piece of this stack, at least good enough so that the whole thing works together as a good enough solution, as an industry, we're not there yet, and we can't actually give composability to developers and start to usher in this wave of new applications. That sounds like a lot. I think the real key to make this happen is, again, some constraints. We don't need to make composability work for every use case right off the bat all the time. Our protocols don't need to scale to entire web scale at once. They need to support a few use cases that become the proving point, similar to Pooja's point about product, that let us know, okay, we're onto something here. We've kind of got the first version of it. Then they'll tell us what they need next. That's one of the really powerful parts about product market fit. You're no longer searching for your user segment. You're no longer searching for the right set of needs. You're no longer like considering the whole world of possible things to do. You just listen to your customers and they tell you what they want next. It gets much easier after that first product market fit. So if we get a few use cases, 1, 2 use cases that are truly leveraging composability, the rest will follow. I think we're starting to see this now. These are a couple that are built on Ceramic today. One is social, so this is a screenshot of a protocol called Orbis, which basically makes it easy to drop Web3 social features into any application. And so chat, DMs, forums, things like this, easy SDK and protocol. The powerful thing here is if I'm on Creebit, which uses Orbis, and Henry's on DXDAO, we can still be messaging each other. We can still have a chat there. It doesn't matter if one of us is on one platform or the other. If I make a new connection on Creebit, it shows up in DXDAO, so they grow together. So it gets much easier to build an audience as a developer when you tap into this composability. Another one's reputation. Super important throughout the Web3 space in a whole bunch of different ways. People talk about KYC for tokens, but it's way broader than that. Gitcoin launched their Gitcoin Passport, aggregates a whole bunch of anti-Sybil proofs, and basically provides collusion resistance for their Ethereum and just general grants rounds products. It's the only way they can protect against collusion in this open network. But the powerful thing is because this anti-Sybil is put into an open data network, now Zerion can add it, Orbis can add it, and as they do, they can add their own anti-Sybil proofs to it. So as more people adopt it, Gitcoin's anti-Sybil proof gets better itself. And each time someone adds it, the product experience gets better in every other platform that uses it. So composability is starting to happen in practice in Web3 today, and we have the seeds of what to focus on if we want to expand it. I don't think this is a brand new paradigm. I think this is really a continuation of open source. We've seen the power that open source software has in enabling developers to build much faster and broader. It powers a huge portion of the web today. I think you can look at blockchains as basically open finance, giving people the power to innovate in financial ways and use those Legos. And I think what we're missing is open data. The web runs mostly on code and data, and with little bits of finance in there. So if we're serious about Web3 working, this composable data layer, this open source data layer is, I think, the key. Wouldn't be complete without a meme. So I said before, I think we just need a couple of use cases to really take off and snowball. One of the reasons I think that is we are so anchored in traditional kind of product talk and Silicon Valley talk about if you really want to succeed, you need a 10x better product. But that's completely a factor of huge switching costs and the fact that if I want to collaborate with you or work with you, we need to be on the same platform. In a web on composable data, that's just not the case. We can be on 2 different note-taking platforms, but operating on the same underlying data. We can be chatting across platforms. Switching costs are super low, and it's no longer driven by the same network effect types of things. And so instead of 10x leaps every 5, 10 years, you get just constantly compounding innovation. And I think that's going to attract all the developers who are in that middle spot, who want to innovate, want to build, don't need billion-dollar returns to incentivize them to do it. They just want some promise of a possible business online. That's it. Thanks.